I'm Doug Melville, Chief Diversity Officer for TBWA. On I on Diversity. This is actually a real life example of what a diversity officer does. I mean, the conversation comes up time and time again. What does a diversity officer do? What is a day represented in the life of a chief diversity officer? It's the number one question that I get asked. And the reality is every day being a chief diversity officer is completely different. Some days you work with clients because we're in an ad agency business, so some days you work with clients. Some days you work internally with staff and figure out ways to get different individuals to work at the organization, and some days you work on culture, which is how do we maintain an environment that's very inclusive. So today is working with clients and working with staff and working with the culture. They're all three are coming together, but it's a real life example of things that happen, and it's also about articulating and communicating your thoughts and messages to different people based on the importance and value that they are putting on the thoughts and actions that you are speaking in existence, because it's very nuanced. You have to be a good orator and a communicator. You have to also be a good translator of people's feelings. But the reality of a diversity officer is, if you look at diversity in the widest definition, diversity is everyone. So unless everyone is at the table, then we don't have a diverse room. So we look at that as something called the jury test. So if you were to go down to jury duty and look at all the different individuals that are linked to you alphabetically in a jury room, in a waiting area, do those people best reflect the cross-section of society that your office is looking to reflect? So when you go down to your office and see your team, are all those individuals at jury duty reflected in your office? And that's how we define diversity. It includes age, race, ethnicity, it includes state of origin, country of origin. It's about amplifying, and it's also about adding. So some voices you need to amplify, and some voices that aren't at the table you need to add. So when you look at a campaign like this, you can see all those different angles. I moved here because working on Madison Avenue, we work for one of the last ad agencies physically on the street, Madison Avenue. There's two other agencies on Madison Avenue now, and their leases are running out, so TBWA will actually be the only advertising agency physically located on Madison Avenue. I moved here because I wanted to walk to work every day through Times Square. So every single day I walk to work. I walk up 10th Avenue, I walk across Times Square, I pause, I look at all the different billboards, from the largest billboard in the world that's attached to the Marriott Marquis, to the ball that says the year we're in, 2020. I look at all the furry characters that are taking pictures with people and all the individuals looking to sign people up on buses, but I get a lot of inspiration from seeing the ads and the art direction of Times Square. So looking at all of the center of the world is very important. I live here in Hudson Yards area in New York City. Much of my career with different entertainers, and when you work with entertainers or you work with someone releasing an album or a movie or a partnership or in sports, there are definitely polarizing areas in third rails where when you say X, you're going to get two different sides of the coin. I think when you work at a corporation, they really minimize the negative and only focus on the positive, where I'm fine talking about both sides, but as a diversity officer, it's about listening to both sides and then making a collective compromise together to move forward. And as someone who's mixed race, when you grow up half black and half white, you also have to deal with the duality of two separate cultures that neither of them you're truly a part of. But you have to take the compromise of both and take the best and leave the rest. And I think when we look at a campaign like this, the best is what we have created and the rest is Twitter trolls. But there has to be a consensus around a table on, how people feel most comfortable moving forward. From a family standpoint, my dad was one of the first black judges in the state of Connecticut, and he actually came up by donating his time as a public defender to the Black Panthers. So there's books written about the cases where he would donate his time to help release and try cases for the Black Panthers when they didn't have the opportunity to afford the proper legal service. He was raised by his uncle from the time he was 6 years old, and his uncle was General Benjamin O. Davis Jr. He was the commander of the Tuskegee Airmen. He created the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. He created the airport security that we use today. He created the U.S. Air Marshal Program. He sat as the Assistant Secretary of Transportation under Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and LBJ. So we grew up in a family of first. He was the first black graduate to graduate from West Point. So that was where my dad was raised. Ben Davis was raised by his dad, who was the first black general in the United States Army. And then Benjamin Davis Sr. was raised by his dad, who was the only black that was allowed in the White House. He was the babysitter for Ulysses S. Grant's son. So throughout my family history, we've really dealt with many people talking about no, many people telling me or people that this should be this way or that's not the way it's supposed to be. But I just look at it and just say it's onward and upward, because being a diversity officer is my career because I deal with images and names and likeness. My dad's career was law, but Ben Davis was the first diverse officer in the United States. So well before anybody cared about diversity, we were working from a legacy situation to cement equality for people of color as it related to economic opportunity and career trajectory and the ability to build wealth and a legacy. So I never knew that being a chief diversity officer was an actual career or a job. It's not anything that I had initially planned to do, but it was the result of connecting the dots. Like Steve Jobs said, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, and when you align everything, it seemed to be the best career for me, although that was nothing that was planned in advance. So the important thing about looking at diversity in a holistic way is that in order for you to make any type of change in your organization as it relates to diversity and inclusion, 3 areas must be met. The first area is the workforce, which is who actually comes to work every day. The second area is the culture, the environment people are in. But the third area I feel is the most important and the least talked about, or equally as important, and that is supplier diversity. And that is, do we on an ongoing and consistent basis look at hiring businesses that are owned, operated, and controlled by women and people of color? Economic opportunities really go to those who own the businesses or own the content. So it's important to realize that companies today are already writing checks all the time. Companies are writing checks all the time. Just like as people, we write checks all the time. Typically a profit margin, 6%, 20, 30, 40, 50% goes to the owner of the business. But diversity is not just about what we create in our environment, it's ensuring that we give economic opportunities. So if you look at all 30 million businesses in the United States of America, 52% of every business is owned, operated, and controlled by a woman or person of color, and 48% of every business is owned, operated, and controlled by a white male. So for the sake of the argument, to make it simple, let's say it's 50-50. But when it comes to business transactions, 94 cents of every dollar goes to a white male-owned company, and 6 cents of every dollar goes to a business owned, operated, and controlled by a woman or person of color. So all these invoices don't come out of somebody's pocket that works at the company, they all come out of the corporate bank. So it's important that as employees, that when we know better, we do better, and we build awareness for these companies. In the creative space, it's always the gaze of the art buyer. So it's very subjective. Supplier diversity started as it related to the automotive industry. So it was based on much more commodity-based industries, lug nuts, steel, price per pound, things of that nature. In the creative industry, diversity as it relates to who we hire, which is production, casting, set design, translation, duplication, things like that. Many of those are soft skills and soft businesses. So you can be very subjective with who you hire based on, did you like their lens? Did you like their eye? So if the decision makers aren't diverse as it relates to the aperture of how they look at the businesses, most of the time the businesses themselves are not going to change, because you just hire the individuals that you know and that you work with in your circle. So in the creative industry, supplier diversity has been much slower to take off than any other vertical, because of the subjective nature of how much is an idea worth, how much is a lens worth, how much is this aperture worth versus a commodity industry. So we've been trying to work on that. Several years ago, I had gone to our executive team and I had asked, what would happen if we aggregated all of the best, highest quality women and diverse owned, operated, and controlled creative companies in the United States? What if we did a checklist to see how their website looked, what was the quality of their work, did they have the insurance minimums, do they have a social reach, and do they have a book of work that we feel comfortable with? And what if we aggregated them all in one place together? The challenge that's happening with diversity is that all of the diverse groups are individually fighting for themselves. So the Native Americans, the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic community, veterans, women, Black people, all of us are working as one in our roles, but on their side, each group is most concerned about the problems that are inherent to their community. So diversity has actually become splintered. So the purpose of One Sandbox was to unify all of the different areas and nuances of diversity in one centralized place. So the buyers, which would be other ad agencies or brands or creative companies or companies that buy creative services, could all go to one centralized place and get all access to these companies, so they have a better chance of getting hired. Some call it a Yelp, but we don't do ratings. It's just really about building awareness. Now, one thing that people don't like is databases. So when you ever say the word database to someone, people go, oh, I don't want to go to another database. It's not updated. It's not, who knows who goes to this thing. So one of the things that we did is we added a timestamp to One Sandbox, so the last time it was updated. Also, we added a news feed, so we ensure that new articles are added every day. So there's over 7,000 articles to keep you up to date on diversity. Then we added all the conferences and award shows that you can attend. For conferences, it's conferences that have like-minded discussions, and for award shows, it's all the creative areas where your work can be awarded for a diverse or inclusive award or category. So the One Sandbox is really a centralized term based around search, so we call it a search engine for creative diversity. And it's available for free online, and anybody can join and register their company or go see the news feed every day. Right. And it's funded by companies who pay to access all the vendors. So it's freemium. For 75% of the site is free, and then 25% we work with companies that want to support this. So it launched a year ago. Last year we had 750,000 views on our content. which was really exciting. And then we also had a lot of inquiries from different companies, and we had a lot of businesses load up their profiles. So overall right now we have 407 businesses on there. And just at TBWA, we've spent $230 million with the businesses on that website. So this is not something that we're just saying, this is something that we're actually doing. And with that, last year we were the Global Creative Ad Agency of the Year. So people sometimes want to find a result. How do I know the diversity is working? But change in an organization takes 3-year running average, about 1,000 days. So you have to give it, at least 3 years to get change started. And then once the change is rolling, it takes another 3 years. So on year 7 of me being at TBWA, us winning that award is not due to our effort, but it is inclusive of this effort among other efforts, because diversity is like dieting. It's not, if you're big and you need to lose weight, going vegan one day isn't going to do it. Not eating for 2 days isn't going to do it. You have to make constant, habitual change over the course of time, and then the results will follow. And so we're investing in diversity, just like someone in that analogy would invest in weight loss. And we encourage companies, and that's why we opened our blueprint of our diversity strategy. It's available online. I have it on my LinkedIn page, because I think it's important to realize that unless you have the infrastructure set up, there is going to be no change in your organization. Some of my allies in this game are other chief diversity officers. I consider Tiffany R. Warren at the Omnicom Group my #1 ally, but we all work together. I think it's a friendly fire vertical and category. So from the other ad agencies, we all know one another. We work together with one another. There's a lot of community being built. I think I also have a lot of allies in our C-suite, so I think it's always about working with your other executive team, the CCO, the CEO, the CFO. I think most interestingly though, Vaughn, my biggest ally is actually our CFO, because my role actually falls under the finance department. So I report directly to the CFO. So most diversity officers report either to HR, they have a dotted line to the CEO, or a dotted line to legal. And we have those structures in secondarily, but my primary report is actually our CFO. So when you understand the finances of an organization and understand how the levers work, when you're adding different accounts, so headcount goes up, when you have to do a headcount reduction because a client has switched agencies or the contract is up, all these different areas affect how we communicate. So to have that direct access to the finance department makes our job as diversity officers much more effective. And I tell companies all the time, if you start a diversity department, it's important that you put it in the finance department. But I think many times finance officers don't necessarily want to manage a diverse executive, because the skill set is so different from the finance team. But I think from a change agent perspective, it really has an invaluable alignment. Is diversity a handout? Are people that are less qualified being considered? Are we lowering our standards to bring in a wider audience? And the answer to that is no. Of course, you could do that if that's what you so choose to do, but the reality of it is diversity is not a handout, it's just an equal playing field to give someone a hand up. Historically in this country, people have been divided by the color of their skin. If you look at the history of America, which I've studied extensively, slavery, which I like to say enslaved people, because these were regular, normal, vivid, happy, loving individuals. They were enslaved in bondage. They were not inherently slaves as they're described. But when the enslaved people came to America, they were both black and white. But the individuals over time, as America continued to grow, was having a hard time distinguishing who was free and who was enslaved. So they made an overall, once and for all effort that everyone who was black was automatically going to be enslaved, and everyone who was not was automatically going to be free. And there's stories that you read about in the South When you had people coming up from the Mexico region that were dark-skinned, they would ask them a sentence in Spanish, and if they replied, they were let go because they knew that they were from the Mexico region. And they knew that if you were from Africa, you wouldn't know how to reply to that sentence. So that was how they divided it in the very beginning of the conversation. So from the time in 1619, when that happened, all the way until the Civil Rights Act was passed in the mid-1960s, people of color have not historically been given an equal opportunity to succeed financially, with housing, with loans, and things of that nature. And to say that what happened 2 or 3 generations ago doesn't matter today is not realistic, because that's essentially saying that your mother and your grandmother have no bearing on anything that has happened to you in your life, which is just not true. Where you live, what school you went to, how you were raised, what you ate, what your craft is, all these things are based on your history. So when it comes to today, looking at the diversity conversation is not about saying, oh, this person is less than, so we're going to elevate them. It's about saying this person is equal to, and we're going to give them a fair shake. You cannot hire who you do not interview. So the most important thing about looking at diverse candidates is just widen the pool of who you interview. You cannot hire who you don't interview, but most of the time people don't widen the pool of who they interview. They interview a very narrow group of people that they have a friendship with or a kinship to or aligns with themselves. Like, people's ideal hire is a mini-me. So it's very important to say, widen who you interview starts the process. The next part of that is looking at that individual and asking yourself from almost an internal editorial standpoint, are people that have been running uphill with a crosswind in their face better than other individuals? Because a lot of people would argue that diversity is a premium. If you talk to someone who's been in the game for all these years, who's had to constantly fight and maneuver and work different rooms, that person shouldn't be looked at as less than. That person should be looked at as more capable, at minimum equally capable, to handle any environment or situation they're put in. One of the most touching stories that's happened since I've been at TBWA with an MWBE, which is an acronym for Women in Multicultural Business Enterprise, that I've had, was a story I actually had with the founder of a company called Extra Extra Casting. And I had been at the job for maybe 2 years, and I kept promoting them because they were an extras casting company, and many of our commercials use extras in their casting. And I had a call with her because I kept seeing her getting hired, and I kept pushing them, and they kept getting hired. And she got on the phone and she was almost to tears, and she's like, you know, I used to work in the industry. I started out as an actress. Me and my husband, or boyfriend at the time, started this extras casting company. We bought all the technology, we bought all the tools, but no one was hiring us because we didn't necessarily have the contacts. But then we started connecting with you, and we've gotten so many more jobs, and it's allowed us to scale. And the woman was a palpable, real example of a CEO and business owner that no longer wanted to work for someone, but wanted to spread her wings and have her own corporation and her own conversation. And being an ally to someone like that is so important, because a lot of these business owners worked in our industry and could not grow any farther, or worked in our industry and were more advanced and felt that they had more skills to offer this world than were being provided in their existing job. So what did these individuals do? They started their own company. So the last thing we want to do is not work with them and not hire their services, because all you're doing is perpetuating a system where no one can win. If working at a company isn't giving you and fulfilling you, then you start your own company. But if we don't hire you once you started your own company, yet we loved you when you worked here, then ultimately what happens to the spirit of that individual? And I think that's where you look at the larger context of people that feel like they weren't given the best opportunities because there was no conversation around diversity 10 years ago. Someone once said to me, that if you are looking for a diverse employee, the chances are if you put plus 7+ years on a resume or 10+, you're going to get two completely different groups of individuals. 7+ years, because that's when the diversity officer conversation started happening, will get you diverse candidates. But if you say 10+ years, there's a 99% chance that the individual that you're going to hire is going to be white. Not that that's bad, it's just to say that the diversity conversation hasn't stretched really much farther than 10 years, although the conversation has been going back since the beginning of corporate America. The action associated with it has really spurred in the last 7 years. So I tell people, if you want a diverse pool of candidates, start with 7 years or less of experience.